As part of the celebrations of Leeds Museum's 200th birthday, I've been looking at the contribution made by women in the early years. Women could join the Philosophical and Literary Society in their own right from at least as early as 1836, although the society was very heavily dominated by men. Maria Fearne was one of the first to join as an annual subscriber. She was born in 1784 in Pontefract, the older daughter of Dr. William Fearne, at one time physician to the General Infirmary at Leeds, and also the owner of Nether Mills at East Street on the River Aire. Although no longer in the family's ownership, the mill was still in use as late as 1954. Maria's mother died in 1789 and her father in 1795. The mills were left in equal proportion to the 4 children. Maria's first donation to the museum's collection came in 1849, when the annual report states that she donated fossils from the London clay from the British Natural History Society, for which she subscribed for the express purpose of presenting specimens to the museum. In 1850, she donated a series of 20 shells from the London clay of Hampshire, beautifully mounted under glass. A final donation came in 1851, when she donated a valuable specimen of a Plesiosaurus, which came from the Lies of Somerset and is still in the collection. This was during the same period that Mary Anning was making her discoveries, and this is what the Plesiosaurus might have looked like. Maria always took an active interest in the society, attending the annual conversations in the Philosophical Hall and also donating to the society financially. Her generosity extended beyond the museum, contributing funds for the relief of the Irish after the potato famine, to the Leeds Soup Kitchen, and to funds for the building of St Philip's Church, which stood near Gott's Mill on Wellington Street. It was consecrated in 1847, but demolished in 1931. A wealthy woman, she lived in her later years at 26 Springfield Place and took holidays on the East Coast with her servant. No doubt she kept her eye open for fossils. At her death in 1854, her representatives donated the remainder of her collection to the museum. The annual report states, bearing in mind the great interest that lady always took in the prosperity of the society, most liberally presented to the museum her collection of fossils and minerals, consisting of several hundred specimens, illustrative of the geology of the Yorkshire coast, and many fine specimens of agates, jaspers, and crystals of quartz. Ethelred Benett, a near contemporary of Maria Fearne, was a distinguished geologist in her own right, and is sometimes referred to as the first female geologist. Like Miss Fearne, she came from a wealthy family, being the daughter of the local squire, and she also remained single. She spent most of her life in the village of Norton Bavon, near Warminster, in Wiltshire. She amassed a large collection of fossils, which came mainly from Wiltshire, and which attracted many visitors to see her collection. Some of her fossils were the first to be described and illustrated, and some were very rare and also very well preserved. The fossils came from the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, and she had a particular interest in fossil sponges. These are some examples of her fossils which are still in the museum's collection. Her unusual first name sometimes led to her being mistaken for a man. In fact, Tsar Nicholas I appointed her a Doctor of Civil Law of the University of St. Petersburg at a time when women were not accepted into universities. After her death in 1845, Leeds Museum records the purchase of a considerable number of her fossils. The specimens were bought for £103, with money subscribed by a number of distinguished members of the Society. The high price they paid suggests that they were highly sought after. The Philosophical and Literary Society showed considerable acumen in buying the collection, since most of her collection, which was once feared lost entirely, is now at the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia. The more famous collector, Mary Anning, died 2 years after Miss Benett. It's interesting to speculate whether these three women knew of each other. If Ethelred Benett could be described as the first female geologist, then perhaps Violet Crowther could be described as the first female curator of Leeds Museum. Violet Crowther was born in 1884, the second of the three daughters of Henry Crowther and his wife Martha. She was born in Leeds, but spent her early years in Truro, where her father was curator of the Museum of the Royal Institution of Cornwall. But by 1893, the family was living in Leeds again, when Henry was appointed curator of the Museum of the Leeds Philosophical and Literary Society. Violet and her sisters Vertie and Vera and her parents were all keenly interested in natural history. The Leeds Mercury and the Yorkshire Post make frequent references to them in their reports of the Leeds Nature Study Society's meetings and excursions. Violet seems to have had a particular interest in beetles. In 1904 and 5, she exhibited Dor, Pill, Colorado, Rhinoceros, Diamond and Apple Tree beetles. At one meeting, she spoke of scarab beetles with her own illustrations and pointed out that Leeds Museum had 2 Egyptian coffins with beetles drawn upon them. These may well have been the mummy cases she described. Both of them were lost in the bombing of the museum in 1941. On the census for 1911, Violet was described as an assistant to the curator of the museum, and she clearly worked closely with her father. She coloured many of the lantern slides, which he used, and she assisted in preparing the lectures for the society and the public, and for the children's lectures for which her father became well known. The museum's school scheme began in 1901 with year-round lectures which reached, entertained and educated 15,000 children. In 1921, the Philosophical Hall and its museum was transferred to Leeds Corporation, and Henry Crowther was appointed curator with a salary of £425. Miss Violet M. Crowther was to be a museum's assistant. Her salary is not recorded. Together they began to collect local history material, which they described as bygones. Kitty Ross, social history curator at Abbey House Musuem, wrote that they began serious collecting in 1914. In 1927, Violet became the first curator of the newly opened Abbey House Museum, although she's still referred to as an assistant curator, and the collection of bygones was transferred there. Through her leadership, she made a lasting contribution to the social history collection. Violet remained curator until her retirement in 1947. Although her contribution was never fully acknowledged or recognised in her lifetime, she was warmly commended for her work in the Second World War, when Abbey House had to cope with the aftermath of the bombing of the museum in Park Row. During her lifetime, she donated numerous items to the museum, including a rather stylish hat, described as of black velvet and plush, with a wide corded band and an Art Deco brooch at the side. Possibly she bought it at Marshall and Snellgrove's or Leeds' premier department store, the Grand Pygmalion, both of which would have been handy for the museum. In all, Violet worked for the museum for 48 years. Violet Crowther, Ethelred Benett and Maria Fearne, 3 interesting, intelligent women who contributed much to Leeds and to Leeds Museum during its first 100 years.